a warm round of applause for Mr. Tim Whitmore.
I was first invited to participate in Poetry Night here at First Christian Church by Barbara about 10 years ago, and she suggested even the poem that I'm going to share with you tonight. And I have to thank you so much for inviting me to come and be with you here tonight. And you talked about Matthew 22 and the commandment to love God and love one another. And this is a room full of people that make that a very easy commandment to follow. I just look around the room and see so many people that I love and respect, and just really wonderful to be here with you tonight. The poem that I'm going to read was written by James Weldon Johnson, who was a turn-of-the-century poet, preacher, composer, and he wrote a series of 7 sermons/poems that were called God's Trombones, and probably the best known of which is called The Creation, which I'd like to share with you here tonight. And God stepped out on space, and he looked around and said, "I'm lonely. I'll make me a world." As far as the eye of God could see, darkness covered everything, blacker than 100 midnights deep down in a cypress swamp. And God smiled, and the light broke, and the darkness rolled up on one side, and the light stood shining on the other, and God said, "That's good." Then God reached out and took the light in his hands, and God rolled the light around in his hands until he made the sun. And he set that sun ablazing in the heavens, and the light that was left from making the sun, God gathered it up in a shining ball and flung it against the darkness, spangling the night with the moon and the stars. Then down between the darkness and the light, he hurled the world. And he said, "That's good." Then God himself stepped down, and the sun was on his right hand, and the moon was on his left, and the stars were clustered about his head, and the earth was under his feet, and God walked, and where he trod, his footsteps hollowed the valleys out and bulged the mountains up. Then he stopped, and he saw that the earth was hot and barren. So God stepped over to the edge of the world, and he spat out the 7 seas. He batted his eyes, and the lightnings flashed. He clapped his hands, and the thunders rolled. First time I did this poem at Poetry Night, it was at this point that the lights went out. And the waters of the earth came down, cooling waters came down. And the green grass sprouted, and the little red flowers blossomed. The pine tree pointed his finger to the sky. The oak spread out his arms. The lakes cuddled down into the hollows of the ground, and the rivers ran down to the sea. God smiled again, and the rainbow appeared and curled itself around his shoulder. Then God raised his arm and waved his hand over the sea and the land, and he said, bring forth, bring forth." And quicker than God could drop his hand, fishes and fowls and beasts and birds swam the rivers and the seas, roamed the forests and the woods, and split the air with their wings. And God said, "That's good." Then God walked around. And God looked around on all that he had made, and he looked at his sun, and he looked at his moon, and he looked at all the little stars, and he looked out on his world with all its living things. God said, I'm lonely still. Then God sat down on the side of a hill where he could think. By a deep, wide river, he sat down with his head in his hands. God thought and thought till he thought, I'll make me a man. Up from the bed of the river, God scooped the clay, and by the bank of the river, he kneeled him down. And there, the great God Almighty, who lit the sun and fixed it in the sky, who flung the stars into the farmost corner of the night, who rounded the earth in the middle of his hand, this great God, like a mammy bending over her baby, kneeled down in the dust, toiling over a lump of clay till he shaped it in his own image. Then into it he blew the breath of life, and man became a living soul. Amen. Amen.